My name is Marcella Rowan, and if you told me 5 years ago that I'd be standing in my front yard, arguing with my mother-in-law about whether she had the right to hold my house keys like a set of trophies, I'd have laughed and called you dramatic. But here I am, clutching my keys so hard they leave half-moon marks in my palms, my breath frosting the early morning air, and that woman, Lillian Rowan, standing there like she owns the bricks beneath my feet. I'd always known Lillian had a way of looking at things that weren't hers and deciding they should be. It started with small things. A necklace she once gave me as a gift, only to ask for it back when she liked the way it matched her earrings better. My husband's time, stolen in slow slices, until we were living like roommates in our own marriage. But when it came to my house, our house, the house my husband and I worked 2 jobs each to afford, this time, she'd picked the wrong battlefield. I suppose I should back up. You deserve to know how we got here. You and anyone else listening to this tangled tale of keys and doors and the ways people try to lock you out of your own life. It was last winter when my husband Julian and I found this place, a red brick semi-detached Victorian on the outskirts of Manchester. Not the grandest house on the block, but ours. A mortgage that made our stomachs twist every month but reminded us we were building something real, something with walls and windows that were not hers. Julian and I met when I was 22, waiting tables at a grimy cafe downtown. He was soft-spoken then, gentle in a way that made me feel like the world might not chew me up after all. His mother, though, always made me feel like I was walking barefoot over broken glass. Every smile edged with sharpness, every compliment barbed. But I loved him. And I thought stupidly, that was enough to make her love me too. It never was. The first crack in our new life came when Julian lost his job. Tech startup folded overnight, like so many do, leaving us with a mortgage, bills, and a silence between us that grew so thick I could almost see it pressing at the corners of our rooms. I picked up extra shifts at the flower shop, wrapped lilies and roses for Valentine's Day sweethearts, all while my own sweetheart sat at home, scrolling job boards until his eyes glazed over. That's when she started coming around more. Helping, she said, bringing casseroles and unwanted advice, slipping herself between us like a cold draft through a cracked window. I knew what she wanted, even if she didn't say it outright. She wanted to plant herself here, to make sure I understood this house was not really mine. That it was her son's, therefore hers. One Thursday afternoon, she let herself in while I was elbow-deep in the sink, washing off the day's grime. I turned around, and there she was, standing in my kitchen like she'd always belonged there. "Marcella," she said, her voice all sugar, "you should give me a set of keys. For emergencies." I dried my hands on a tea towel, my stomach rolling. "We already have a spare, Lillian. It's with Julian's best friend." "But he's hardly family," she sniffed, circling the kitchen island like a hawk. "What if something happened? What if Julian needed me and you were out working? She said it like it was something filthy. Like earning the money to keep our lights on made me less of a wife. "I'm sure we'll be fine," I said, mustering a smile that felt like a mask stretched too tight. But she just smiled back, thin-lipped, as if she'd heard my no, and filed it away like an unpaid debt. That night, Julian and I fought. He didn't see the big deal. "She just wants to help," he said, pinching the bridge of his nose. "She's worried about us." "She's not worried, Julian. She wants control." He looked at me like I'd kicked a puppy. "She's my mother, Marseille." Yes, and I was his wife. But in this house, I was starting to feel like I came in second place. It was weeks later when I found the spare key missing from the little tin box by the door. I knew, without needing to ask, where it had gone. And sure enough, that Sunday at dinner, she dropped it into conversation like it was her right. "I let myself in the other day," she said, buttering her roll. "I wanted to drop off a few things." I looked at Julian. He just cleared his throat and asked her to pass the salt. After that, it became routine. She'd come and go as she pleased. Sometimes I'd come home and find her in my living room, leafing through my mail. Other times she'd rearrange the kitchen cupboards to make them more practical. One morning I found her in our bedroom, folding my laundry like she was the queen of this castle. But the worst was the day she brought a realtor to my doorstep. I opened the door, hair a mess, wearing Julian's old hoodie and socks with holes at the toes. There she stood, perfectly put together, with a man in a shiny suit beside her. "This is Miss Rowan," she said to him, gesturing at me like I was the housekeeper. "She's just here temporarily." "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice a rasp. "We're looking at options," she said. "You know, in case Julian wants to move closer to me." I laughed. A short, sharp sound that bounced off the hallway walls. "You don't own this house, Lillian." "Don't I?" she said. "Who do you think paid for the deposit?" She hadn't. I had. My inheritance from my father. Every penny of it went into this house. She knew that, but she wanted that man to believe otherwise. "You should go," I said to the realtor, my voice trembling but strong enough. "There's nothing for you to see." He looked from me to her, then back to me. "My apologies, Miss Rowan." After he left, she didn't bother hiding her sneer. "You think you've won, don't you?" "It's not about winning," I snapped. "It's about you not crossing a line." She leaned in close, her perfume making my eyes water. "Everything that belongs to my son belongs to me. And you're just a placeholder." I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, listening to Julian's breathing, wondering how we'd come to this. I loved him. But love felt like a door she kept unlocking, walking through whenever she pleased. The next morning, I changed the locks. Paid for it out of my own pocket, watched the locksmith take the old cylinders out, one by one. When Julian came home, he was furious. "You can't just shut her out," he yelled. "Watch me," I said, holding the new keys tight. "This is my house too," which brings us back here. This cold morning, the sun still hiding behind the gray clouds, my mother-in-law on my porch with her hand outstretched. "Give me the keys, Marcella," she says. "Or so help me." "So help you what?" I ask, my voice low, a spark catching in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. Her eyes narrow. "You'll regret this." I let out a breath that fogs the space between us. "No, Lillian. I think you're the one who will regret underestimating me." And with that, I step back, keys rattling in my pocket, the heavy front door slamming shut behind me. My house. My rules. And she still hasn't read the mortgage papers that say exactly whose name is on that deed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The slam of the door echoed through the hallway, louder than thunder in my chest. I stood there, leaning against the oak frame, waiting to feel the weight of what I'd just done crash down on me. But it didn't. Instead, there was this strange stillness inside me, like my mind was catching its breath after running for years. I could hear her voice outside, muffled through the thick door. Her nails scratched at the handle once, then silence. Lillian was a woman who liked to make threats face to face, not shout them at closed doors. The smell of stale coffee drifted from the kitchen. I walked in, stepping over a trail of mud she'd tracked in with her designer boots. I'd clean it later. For now, I needed something warm, something to remind me I was alive, and not just an actor in the script she'd been writing for my life. I poured a cup, my hands trembling just enough that the spoon rattled against the ceramic. I wondered what Julian would say when he came home. He'd call me unreasonable, maybe even cruel. But what about her? When would he see what she was doing to us, what she'd always done? I sank into the chair by the window, staring out at our front garden. The lavender bushes I'd planted last spring were brittle with frost, branches bowed under the weight of ice. I'd wanted to replace them before the first freeze, but I never found the time. Or maybe I never found the fight for something so small when the bigger battles ate up all my energy. The coffee was bitter on my tongue. I pushed it away and dug into the drawer by the radiator, pulling out the thick manila envelope that held our mortgage papers. I flipped through them, the pages crisp and sharp. My name, Marcella Rowan, etched into every line that mattered. Lillian never bothered to read these. She assumed, the way she always did, that she owned everything her son touched. When the front door finally clicked open that evening, I was ready. Julian stepped in, his shoulders hunched against the cold. He kicked off his boots and looked up, his eyes tired but warm for the briefest moment before they landed on the envelope in my hands. "What's that?" he asked, setting his laptop bag by the stairs. "Proof," I said, my voice calm. "Proof that what's happening here isn't right." He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose like he always did when he felt cornered. "She called me, you know, said you slammed the door in her face." "I didn't slam the door in her face," I said. "I slammed the door on her lies." He flinched at that. "She's your mother-in-law, Marcella. She's family." "Is she?" I asked, my chest tightening. "Because she's been acting like a landlord, or worse." Julian stepped forward, lowering himself into the chair across from me. He looked at the papers, then at me. "You know she means well." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that scraped my throat raw. "She means well? Julian, she brought a realtor to our doorstep. She's telling people this house is hers." He shifted, the floor creaking beneath his feet. "She just wants to make sure we're stable." "Stable?" I repeated. "Or under her thumb, because those are not the same thing." He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the envelope. I pulled it back. "Read it," I said. "Every page. You've never bothered to, have you?" He looked like he wanted to argue, but instead he ran a hand through his hair and leaned back. "Why does this matter so much to you?" I swallowed hard. "Because I'm tired of living in a house where my word doesn't matter, where she can come and go as she pleases, where I'm just the woman who lives here, not the woman who built this with you." His eyes flickered, some old tenderness surfacing only to be washed away by that familiar look of conflict. "She's alone, Marcella. Dad's gone, and she's scared. So am I said, my voice breaking for the first time that day. "I'm scared every day that this place I fought so hard for will never feel like mine, because she keeps walking through that door like she owns it." Julian leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "What do you want me to do?" The question hung between us, heavy and dangerous. "I want you to choose," I whispered. "Her or me." His eyes widened. "That's not fair." "Neither is this," I shot back. "I'm not asking you to abandon her. I'm asking you to set boundaries. To tell her she can't have keys to a house she didn't pay for. A house that's in both our names, not hers." He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. The clock on the wall ticked out a rhythm that sounded like my heartbeat. After what felt like hours, he nodded. "Okay, I'll talk to her." Relief didn't come, not really. Because talk was cheap when it came to Lillian. She had a way of turning words into weapons, twisting them until they cut exactly where she wanted. 2 days later, I found out just how deep her claws were buried. It was a Friday evening when the knock came. Not a polite tap, but a sharp, insistent pounding that rattled the doorframe. I opened it to find her standing there, flanked by Julian's cousin Harriet, a lawyer, of course. "We need to talk," Lillian said, her eyes flicking to the lock I'd changed. "Inside." I stood my ground. "If you've got something to say it here." Harriet cleared her throat, pulling a stack of papers from her leather briefcase. "Lillian has concerns about the title to this house. She believes there may be grounds to contest your sole claim to certain parts of the equity." I laughed, though there was no humor in it. "You think you can just waltz in here and—" "You have no idea how property law works, do you?" Harriet interrupted, smugness dripping from every syllable. "Joint ownership can be a murky thing, especially when family money is involved." "Family money?" I hissed. "There is no family money. I paid for this with my inheritance." "Which Lillian claims was intended for the family, not just you." Harriet pressed on. "She's prepared to seek legal action if you refuse to hand over a set of keys." I glanced at Julian, who stood behind them, his face pale as milk. "Did you know about this?" He didn't answer. That silence cracked something inside me I didn't know could break. "Get off my porch," I said, my voice trembling but loud enough for the whole street to hear. "And take your threats with you." Harriet gave me a pitying smile. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "And you're underestimating me," I shot back. "Good night." I shut the door before Lillian could wedge her foot inside. This time, there was no shaking hands, no tremor in my bones. Just a steady fire that burned hotter the more they tried to smother it. That night, I called my own lawyer, a woman named Grace who'd helped me untangle my father's estate years ago. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm but businesslike. "Marcella, I was just thinking of you. How's the house?" I closed my eyes, fighting the sting behind them. "Under siege." Grace didn't miss a beat. "Tell me everything." I did. Every humiliating detail. By the end of it, she was silent for a moment before she spoke. "You've got more power than you think," she said. "But you need to be ready to fight for it. This isn't just about keys anymore. It's about control." "I'm ready," I said, my voice small but certain. "Good," she said. "Because they're not going to stop. Not until you make them." I hung up, staring at the shadows dancing on the ceiling. Julian came upstairs hours later. He didn't say a word, just slipped into bed beside me. But there was a gulf between us now, an ocean that no amount of "I love yous" could drain. The next morning, I made copies of the mortgage papers, the inheritance documents, every receipt I could find that tied this house to my name. I put them in a folder and locked them in the safe we'd once bought to hold passports and birth certificates. Now, it held the proof of my backbone. When I left for work, I saw her car parked across the street. She watched me from behind the tinted glass, her silhouette a question mark. One no longer cared to answer. I didn't wave. I didn't flinch. This was my house, and I was done giving away my keys. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. She hadn't read the mortgage papers. Not yet. But she would. And when she did, I'd be ready. Because the front door wasn't the only thing I was about to lock. And the next time she tried to turn that key, she'd find that the woman she'd underestimated was the same woman who'd built these walls brick by stubborn brick, even if it meant tearing down everything else to protect them. The following days turned my house into a fortress. But a fortress can still feel like a prison when you're the only one inside it. I found myself listening for footsteps on the porch. The rattle of the door handle, the jingle of keys that weren't supposed to exist anymore. Each night I stood by the window, watching shadows cross my front garden like ghosts. And every morning, I woke up to the same truth. Lillian wasn't going away. Julian moved through these days like he was stuck in a loop, his shoulders drawn tight, his eyes flickering to the front door every time the bell rang, even when it was just the postman. He wouldn't say it, but I knew he wished I'd just hand her the keys, not because he didn't see what she was doing, but because the thought of standing up to her was too heavy a burden for him to carry. The third night after their doorstep ambush, I found him sitting in the kitchen, a single bulb burning over his head, mortgage papers spread out across the table. His fingers traced the lines of my name like he was reading an ancient map. "Do you remember why we bought this place?" I asked, my voice low, careful not to shatter the silence between us. He looked up, shadows clinging under his eyes. "We wanted to grow old here." I nodded. "And do you think we can do that if she has a key?" He sighed. "She says she's worried about you. About us. She says you're unstable." The word hit me like a slap. Unstable. I almost laughed, but my throat clenched around the sound. "Do I look unstable to you, Julian?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I sank into the chair opposite him, folding my hands around a mug of tea gone cold. "I need you to pick a side." His eyes flickered to the mortgage papers again. It shouldn't be sides, Marseille. But it is, I said. She made it that way. She crossed into our house. Our marriage. And you let her. You stood there while she threatened me with a lawyer. He flinched. I didn't know she'd do that. You didn't want to know. The clock ticked above the stove. We sat in that silence until the tea in my hands felt like ice. He reached for my fingers, but I pulled away. Not out of cruelty, but because I needed him to understand I wasn't doing this halfway anymore. I'm not giving her the keys, I said. And if you hand them over behind my back, I wouldn't. His voice cracked like old paint. I swear I wouldn't. But he was lying. I could feel it. Not because he wanted to betray me, but because he couldn't stand the thought of her rage turned fully on him. It was easier to let her have her way, to let her sink her hooks into our home, than to cut her out. And so the next morning, I changed the locks again, not because I thought he'd do it that day, but because I needed to show him that trust only stretched so far before it snapped. That afternoon, I walked into my lawyer's office, the smell of old books and fresh coffee wrapping around me like a shield. Grace sat across from me, a neat stack of folders between us. She pushed one forward, flipping it open to reveal a photograph of Lillian's house, her name splashed across property records in big, bold letters. Look at this, Grace said, tapping the page with a manicured nail. She's leveraged her own house twice in the last 5 years, maxed out her credit cards. She's one step away from losing her precious little kingdom. I stared at the photo. Lillian's pride and joy, the house she'd inherited from her mother, now a pawn in a game she thought she was winning. She wants your house because she's losing hers, Grace said, her voice as smooth as silk but sharp as the edge of a knife. And if she can sink her claws in now, she'll never let go. What do? I whispered. You keep records. You build walls she can't climb. And you show her that if she wants a war, you're ready to fight it in open daylight. The next week, I changed everything. Bank accounts, passwords, even the alarm system code. I started documenting every time she showed up uninvited. The time she stood at the edge of the garden, the time she rang the bell for 10, 15, 20 minutes straight when she knew I was home, but wouldn't answer. I took photos, videos, printed emails she'd sent Julian, laced with half-truths and threats wrapped up as concern. Julian hated it. He said I was turning our house into a bunker, but the truth was, it already was one. I was just sealing the cracks. One night, I came home late from the florist shop to find a light on upstairs. My heart lurched. I turned every light off when I left. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under my boots. I could hear the soft shuffle of feet above me, the unmistakable sound of drawers opening and closing. My hands shook as I grabbed the fire poker from beside the fireplace. Ridiculous, but it was the only thing heavy enough to feel like a weapon. I climbed the stairs, one step at a time, the old wood moaning with every shift of my weight. I pushed open the bedroom door. And there she was, Lillian, standing in front of my wardrobe, rifling through my drawers like she was searching for something buried in the seams of my life. "How did you get in?" I asked. My voice came out low, steady. The poker trembled in my grip, but I kept it behind my leg where she couldn't see. She turned, her smile brittle, her eyes bright with triumph. "Your husband gave me the keys. He said you'd be out late. He thought it would be nice for me to tidy up for you." I felt something inside me splinter, not just the trust between Julian and me, but the last shred of the life we'd tried to build together under one roof. "You're trespassing," I said. She tilted her head. "It's my son's house. He has every right to give me a key." "No." I stepped forward, my shadow crossing hers. "This is my house. You don't get to decide what happens here." She laughed, a dry, humorless sound that scraped at the edges of the walls. "Oh, Marcella, you really think you're strong enough to push me out?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I pulled my phone from my pocket, thumb hovering over the screen. "Get out now, Or I call the police." Her eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me." We stood like that, two statues frozen in the dim glow of the bedside lamp. And then, without another word, she pushed past me, her perfume trailing behind like a ghost of every battle we'd fought and everyone yet to come. I changed the locks again that night, but locks are only as strong as the people who hold the keys. When Julian came home, I was waiting. The fire poker leaned against the wall like a witness. "You gave her the key," I said. No question, just a fact laid bare between us. He rubbed his face, exhaustion dripping from his shoulders. She needed nothing." I slammed the keys on the table. "She was in our bedroom, Julian. Going through my clothes, our things." "She's my mother," he shouted. "She was just trying to help." "Help?" I laughed, tears burning my eyes. "She's not helping. She's tearing us apart." His silence was all the answer I needed. That night, I slept in the guest room. The cold seeped through the thin blanket, but it felt better than lying beside a man who kept unlocking doors I'd fought so hard to keep closed. In the morning, I made my choice, a choice I'd never imagined making when I first put my name on that mortgage. I called Grace and asked her what it would take to buy Julian out, to take his name off the deed, to make this house mine and mine alone. "You're serious?" Grace asked. "You know what this means, Marcella." "I do," I said. My voice was steel. "No more keys for anyone who doesn't belong here." I didn't tell Julian right away. He came and went, the distance between us growing with each day. Lillian's car still parked across the street every morning, like a crow waiting for scraps. When he found the paperwork, tucked away in my desk drawer, he didn't rage. He didn't beg. He just looked at me, his eyes empty in a way that told me he'd already left this house long before I ever asked him to. And so I stayed. I stayed while he packed his bags, while he drove away with his mother in the passenger seat, her smug smile flickering across my window one last time. I stayed while the house settled around me, creaking, sighing, but mine. I changed the locks again. I changed my number. I changed the part of me that ever thought love meant letting someone else hold the keys to my life. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Lillian wasn't done. Not yet. She'd never read the mortgage papers. But she would. And when she did, she'd find that the door she thought she could open had been bricked shut. One nail, one lock, one signature at a time. When the door finally closed behind Julian and his mother, the silence that filled my house was not the peace I'd imagined. It was the kind of silence that echoes, that hums in the walls like something alive, reminding me with every creak of the floorboards that freedom is sometimes as heavy as the chains you break. I walked through each room that first night alone, touched the walls, ran my fingers over the paint that still needed a second coat in the hallway, the baseboards we'd never quite finished sanding. Little scars of a life built together. And now, left for me alone to finish, the master bedroom felt too big, too wide and hollow. So I shut the door and moved my pillow and a single blanket to the guest room, the smallest room in the house. I curled up on that narrow bed and listened to the storm rattle against the windows, a lullaby for a woman who'd chosen to stand her ground. Morning brought no relief. The sun was pale and weak through the frost-laced glass. I made my way downstairs, every step echoing back the truth. It was just me now. The kettle whistled like a scream in the quiet. I poured a cup of tea and let it grow cold as I stared at the garden. There, under the blanket of snow, the lavender bushes were nothing but blackened sticks. Dead. But they'd grow back. I'd make sure of it. I needed to be careful. Lillian might have retreated for now, but she'd left her footprints all over my life. Julian's name was still on the deed. Until the buyout was final, I was still vulnerable. Grace had warned me it could take months, longer if they decided to fight. And Lillian would fight. She was a woman who'd built her life on the illusion that she could control everyone in it. Losing her grip on me, on this house, would feel like a personal betrayal. And Lillian Rowan never forgave a betrayal. That week, letters started arriving. Thin, official-looking envelopes slipped through my letterbox like threats dressed as polite inquiries. Solicitors' stamps, curt signatures, requests for meetings. Lillian wanted to renegotiate. She wanted to revisit the family contribution. The phantom money she claimed was invested in the house. The more I read, the clearer it became. She was hoping to bury me in paperwork, to drown me in the slow grind of the legal system until I gave up. She didn't know me at all. I sat in Grace's office every other day, building my case like a barricade of stone. Every bank slip, every receipt, every email I'd ever sent Julian about the house, proof that the deposit came from my inheritance, proof that the bills were paid from my wages. Grace guided me like a general leading her soldier to the front line. She told me what to expect. Lillian would stall. She'd twist facts, twist my words, twist the law until it bent like a blade in her hands. But the papers didn't lie. And neither did I. One evening, long after the streetlights flickered on, I found myself back in the master bedroom. I opened the closet. His side still half full of shirts he hadn't bothered to take. I sank to the floor, burying my face in the fabric, breathing in the ghost of the life we'd had. I didn't cry for him. I cried for the girl I'd been, the girl who thought love was enough to keep monsters outside the door. It was almost dawn when I dragged the boxes out from under the bed. The ones with my father's things. Old photos, yellowed papers, letters he'd written me when I was still too young to understand that love could be unconditional. I needed to remember where I'd come from, who I was before Julian, before Lillian, before this house became a battlefield. The next morning, I took the last of the boxes to the attic. A place I'd once hated for its creaks and shadows now felt like a sanctuary. Up there, I found the old ledger, my father's notes about the inheritance he'd left me. His handwriting, so familiar, so steady, spelled out the truth in ink that couldn't be erased. Every penny was mine, with no strings attached. Proof, once again, that Lillian's story was built on air. The weeks blurred together. I worked at the shop during the day, my hands raw from the cold water of the flower buckets. At night, I sat with Grace, combing through every threat, every counter-offer Lillian's lawyer sent. There were days when I wanted to scream, when I wanted to hurl the mortgage papers into the fireplace and let them burn. But then I'd see the front door, the lock I'd changed 3 times now, and remember why I couldn't quit. This house was mine, not because it was bricks and wood, but because I'd fought for every inch of it. Then came the day when Grace called me into her office with a glint in her eye. She slipped, Grace said, holding up a single piece of paper like it was the crown jewel in a case full of stones. I took it from her, my hands trembling. It was a signed statement, buried in old documents, where Lillian had acknowledged in her own handwriting that the deposit for the house was from my father's estate. An offhand note, scribbled during the buying process, probably forgotten the moment she wrote it. "She'll say it's a forgery," I said. Grace laughed. "Let her try. The original is lodged with the bank, her signature, her words. This is the nail in her coffin, Marcella. She has no claim." It should have felt like victory. It did, for a heartbeat. But then came the dread. People like Lillian didn't back down when cornered. They lashed out. I didn't have to wait long to find out how. One night, I came home to find the front door ajar. My heart slammed against my ribs. I stepped inside, my breath clouding in the hallway. Drawers were pulled open, cupboards rummaged through. The living room looked like a crime scene. Cushions slashed open, books torn from shelves. And in the middle of it all, on the coffee table, sat a single sheet of paper. It was a photo. Me, standing at the florist's till, handing cash to the boy who swept the floors on weekends. The note scribbled beneath it said, "How much is your story worth when no one believes you?" I sank onto the floor, my knees hitting the carpet so hard I felt the bruise bloom. She'd broken in, or paid someone to do it. She was telling me she could get in any time she wanted, that the locks meant nothing. But she was wrong. The next day, I didn't call the police. I called a security company instead. Cameras, alarms, motion sensors on every window. I turned my house into the fortress it needed to be, and then I did the thing she never expected. I went to see her, She opened the door with that serpent smile she'd perfected over decades. "Marcella, dear, how lovely to see you." I stepped inside before she could slam it shut. The air smelled of stale perfume and cheap candles. A mask for the rot that clung to every corner of her perfectly kept sitting room. "I know what you did," I said. She tilted her head. "You'll have to be more specific." I dropped the photo on her polished table. Her eyes flicked to it, then back to me. Not a flicker of surprise. "This is your last warning," I said, my voice trembling but the fire in my chest steady as ever. "Stay away from my house. Stay away from me. You have no claim, Lillian. It's over." Her smile didn't falter. "It's never over, dear. You think you've won because you have your name on a piece of paper? Because you changed the locks? Keys can be copied. Doors can be broken." I leaned in, my hands braced on the arms of her chair. "So can people, and I'm done breaking for you." I turned and left her sitting there, her fake smile cracking at the edges. Back home, I sat in the living room. The chaos still scattered around me like bones after a battle. I didn't clean it up that night. I sat with it. Let it remind me that monsters didn't disappear when you turned your back. They waited. They found new cracks in your walls. But this time, my walls were stronger than they'd ever been. And if she came for me again, she'd find out exactly how strong. Because she still hadn't read the mortgage papers. And when she finally did, she'd see the truth she'd spent her whole life trying to bury. You can't own what was never yours to begin with. The morning after I confronted Lillian in her own sitting room, the storm she'd threatened finally broke. It didn't come with a smashed window or another break-in. It came as a letter. Official, heavy, the paper thick enough to feel like it could bruise my fingers just from holding it. The envelope was stamped with the name of her latest solicitor, a new shark in a suit, one I hadn't yet faced across a conference table. I opened it at the kitchen counter, the kettle hissing behind me like a warning. The words inside were cold, clinical. An attempt to freeze me out with legal jargon and implied threats, contesting the inheritance, accusing me of fraudulent transfer of assets, demanding I vacate the property until an equitable resolution can be reached. I let out a bark of laughter that startled me, a sound too wild to belong to the woman I'd been when I signed those mortgage papers. She wanted me to leave my house. The house I'd built room by room with my sweat, my money, my name. The house she'd stalked like prey for years. I poured myself a cup of tea, black, no sugar, and carried the letter into the living room. The cushions were still ripped open from the night of her break-in. I hadn't fixed them yet. Some part of me liked the rawness of it. A reminder that I was still standing, even if she tried to gut me. I set the letter down and called Grace. "Tell me you're sitting down," I said when she answered. "I'm at my desk," she said. "Why? What's she done now?" I read the letter to her, word for word. When I finished, the silence on the other end was deep and sharp. "She's bluffing," Grace said finally. "She knows she can't touch the inheritance. She'd have to prove you hid it, that you used it illegally, and she can't. Not with your father's papers, not with the bank records." "She wants me to break," I said. "Yes," Grace agreed. "So don't. You stay in that house, Marcella. If you leave now, she'll tell every judge she can find that you abandoned your claim." "I'm not leaving," I said. And for the first time, I meant it with my whole heart. But meaning it didn't make it easy. That week, Lillian's game turned from legal letters to the court of public opinion. She knew every neighbor on this street, every shopkeeper I passed on my way to the florist's. Suddenly, I was the woman who'd stolen a house from her grieving son. The whispers followed me like gnats, at the corner store, the post office, the bus stop. "Poor Julian," I heard one woman say, as I pretended to read the labels on a tin of beans. "Working so hard for her, and she just locks him out like a stray dog." I turned, met her eyes. She looked away, pretending she hadn't said it. When I got home that night, there was another letter waiting. Not from a solicitor, but from Julian. His handwriting, crooked and rushed, filled 3 pages of lined paper I recognized from his old desk. He didn't threaten. He didn't beg. He just said he missed me. That he wished we could talk. That his mother was only trying to help. And that maybe, if I gave her a key, just for emergencies, things could go back to how they were. I sat with that letter for hours, reread it until the words blurred. He still didn't see it. Or maybe he did, but he couldn't admit it. To stand up to her would mean admitting that every line she'd drawn around his life was a prison, not a comfort. I couldn't do that for him. And I wouldn't let him drag me back behind those bars. I didn't write back. The next morning I found a dead crow on my porch. It was laid out like an offering, wings spread wide, its beady eyes clouded over with frost. I knew it wasn't an accident. Lillian didn't know subtlety. She knew symbols. She wanted me to see death every time I crossed my own threshold. I took a photo, bagged the bird, called Grace. "Should I file a report?" "Yes," she said. "It may seem small now, but if this escalates, you'll want every piece of evidence." That afternoon, a young constable came by. He looked uncomfortable. No one wants to write up a dead bird, but he took my statement, wrote it all down in his neat notebook. "You think she'll come by again?" he asked. I watched him glance at the locks, the new cameras blinking on the porch. "If she does, I'll be ready," I said. By the end of the week, the tension in my chest was a stone I carried from room to room. But with every new threat, every new letter, every dead thing on my porch, I felt something else growing too. A steel rod in my spine. A voice that whispered, "She's losing. That's why she's screaming." One night, Grace called. "She's pushing for a hearing. She wants the judge to freeze your access to the house until it's resolved." I let out a breath that shook. "Can she do that?" Grace was silent for a heartbeat. "She can ask. But the papers are on your side. We'll be ready." The night before the hearing, I didn't sleep. I walked through every room of the house, touched the walls, stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, the guest room, the little office I'd once painted pale yellow, imagining it would be a nursery one day. Funny, the futures we build in our heads, how they can haunt us just as much as the past. I sat in the living room as dawn broke, the first pale light touching the mess I still hadn't cleaned, the ripped cushions, the photo Lillian left behind. Proof that war doesn't always look like gunfire. Sometimes it looks like paper cuts and whispered lies. In the courtroom, she sat straight-backed and smug, dressed in her best coat, her lawyer whispering in her ear. Julian sat beside her. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Grace stood beside me like a fortress made of flesh and bone. When she spoke, her voice was iron. She laid it all out. The inheritance, the mortgage, the break-ins, the dead crow, the photographs, the cameras, the locks changed 4 times in 6 months. Each piece of evidence, another nail driven into the coffin of Lillian's story. When it was Lillian's turn, she cried. Real tears. She told the judge I was unstable, that I'd driven her son away, that I'd locked her out of the house she'd helped build. Grace leaned over and whispered, "Watch her. She always overplays her hand." And she did. She claimed she'd paid the deposit, claimed she'd gifted the money to Julian and me as a wedding present. But Grace had the bank records, the ledger with my father's handwriting, the statement Lillian herself had signed years ago. We dropped them one by one like hammers onto her lies. When the judge read the final papers, his face was carved from stone. "This house belongs to Mrs. Marcella Rowan," he said. "There will be no forced vacancy, no shared keys, no trespassing. Any further harassment will be met with legal penalties." The gavel fell, and just like that, it was done. But wars don't end when the judge bangs the gavel. Afterward, I walked out into the hallway. Julian stood there, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He looked small. Smaller than I'd ever seen him. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking like a fault line. I didn't answer. I just nodded. I had nothing left to give him. Not forgiveness, not blame. He chose his chains. I chose my freedom. I walked past him, out into the cold winter sunlight. It felt different on my skin. Sharper, brighter. Like the air itself was congratulating me for surviving. Back home, I changed the locks one last time. Watched the old keys drop into a metal tin, the last ghosts of a life that didn't belong here anymore. I curled up on my couch that night, the cushions still ripped, the house still bruised from every fight. But the walls were mine. The locks were mine. The keys were mine. And somewhere, out there in the dark, Lillian was reading the mortgage papers for the first time. Really reading them. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. Because this isn't the end. She can't stand losing, and she's not finished yet. After the courtroom dust settled, the town's whispers changed their tune. Where once I'd felt their eyes on my back like knives, the petty gossip about the ungrateful wife, the homewrecker. Now, they looked at me like I was some cautionary tale, or maybe a hero, depending on who was telling it. The florist shop became my sanctuary and my stage. Customers would lean over the counter, eyes wide, wanting every sordid detail. Did she really break in? Did she really stalk you? Did you really change the locks 4 times? And I'd just smile, tuck a fresh sprig of lavender into their bouquets and say, "It's over now." But the truth was it wasn't over. Not really. The house stood quiet, the new locks gleaming on the front door like a medal pinned to a soldier's chest. But sometimes at night I'd wake up to the creak of the floorboards, the whisper of branches against the windows, and my heart would hammer out that old rhythm. She's here. She's inside. Of course she wasn't. The cameras I'd installed, the motion sensors, the extra deadbolts, they were doing their job. But fear is clever. It slips through cracks you didn't know you'd left open. It curls up beside you in bed and breathes on your neck while you sleep. Julian's letters came less often after the hearing. Once a week, then once a month, then nothing. I didn't know if that was his choice or Lillian's. I didn't ask. I told myself I didn't care. But every Sunday I'd catch myself glancing at the drive, half expecting his old silver hatchback to pull up, for him to come in with a box of pastries and that crooked grin that used to make my knees weak. He never came. In his place, Lillian found other ways to haunt me. Anonymous notes in my postbox. Blank envelopes slipped under my door when I was at work. One morning I came home to find my rose bushes uprooted, the soil scattered like the aftermath of a grave robbery. She was telling me, "Nothing you plant here will ever grow." But she was wrong. When spring came, I dug my hands into the ruined soil, ripped out the dead roots, and planted new roses. Deeper. Hardier. The kind that grow thorns so thick, they make you bleed if you're foolish enough to reach in without care. By May, the final paperwork for the buyout was done. Julian's name, gone from the deed. A single line struck through his signature, replaced by mine alone. I framed that page and hung it in my tiny upstairs office. My trophy, my shield. Grace called me to celebrate. "It's done, Marseille. She can't touch you now." She'd have to physically break in again, and trust me, she's not stupid enough to risk prison. "Are you sure about that?" I asked, half laughing, half dead serious. "Okay, maybe she is that stupid," Grace conceded. "But you've got your cameras, your locks, your lawyer on speed dial. Let her try." That night, I sat in the living room, lights low, my favorite blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The house hummed around me, warm and soft in the glow of a single lamp. And for the first time, I let myself imagine a future, one where the walls didn't whisper threats when I turned my back, one where my keys stayed exactly where I left them. I should have known that was when she'd strike next. It was a Tuesday morning, drizzle hanging in the air like a veil. I just opened the shop, the smell of wet pavement mixing with buckets of lilies and snapdragons. I was elbow deep in an arrangement for an anniversary when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something, that old tremor in my gut, made me answer. A voice I didn't know. Calm. Cold. "Mrs. Rowan? I'm calling from the police station. We need you to come in." "What's happened?" I asked, the stems snapping in my hands. "We'd rather speak in person." I closed the shop in 15 minutes flat, the back soon sign swinging on the glass door as I locked it behind me. The ride to the station felt like an eternity. Each traffic light another moment to imagine every worst-case scenario. Fire, robbery, death. In the sterile white of the interview room, the detective, a young woman with tired eyes and a voice like gravel, slid a photo across the table. Julian. Mugshot. My stomach lurched. "What happened?" "Your ex-husband was picked up early this morning," she said. "He broke into a pharmacy, tried to use your house as his alibi. Says he was with you all night." I stared at the detective, the words falling like stones I couldn't catch. "He hasn't lived with me for months," she nodded. "We know, but he's telling everyone he does. Says you're reconciling, that you're pregnant." "Pregnant?" The laugh that burst out of me sounded like a bark. "That's impossible." "We believe you," she said gently, "but we need your statement. We need to know if he has a key." "He doesn't." The words were ash in my mouth. "Not anymore." When I got home that evening, I found the envelope taped to my front door. No stamp, no address, just my name scrawled across it in Julian's handwriting. Inside, one key. My old spare. The one he'd kept, even after the final locks were changed. And a note. "She says you can't keep me out forever." I sank onto the front steps, the key digging into my palm like a wound that wouldn't clot. He'd fallen so far, or maybe he'd been falling all along and I'd been too busy trying to catch him to see the truth. Inside, I dropped the key into the tin with all the others. Relics of a past I was finally burying. I called Grace. Told her everything. She sighed. "He's spiraling, but she's pulling the strings. Don't doubt that." "What do I do now?" "You keep the locks changed, the cameras on, and you live. Really live. She feeds on your fear. So starve her." So I did. I went to work. I took long walks through the park. I let my neighbors see me smile. When they asked, "How are you holding up?" I told them I was fine. Better than fine. Free. Summer came, and with it, the roses bloomed. Blood red, thorns thick as knives. One morning, I found a single white rose tucked into my postbox. No note, no explanation. But I knew. Lillian never wrote it down. She let her actions speak. I left that rose on my kitchen table until it withered, petals curling like fists. A reminder, she was still watching, still waiting. But so was I. One Sunday night, I heard the motion sensor ping on my phone. A figure in the garden, half hidden by the shadows of the rose bushes. I didn't call the police this time. I flicked on every light in the house. Opened the front door. Stood there in my pajamas, bare feet on the porch. She froze when she saw me. "Lillian?" Her coat pulled tight around her, hair plastered to her forehead by the damp night air. "What do you want?" I asked. My voice was soft. Soft like a blade pressed against a throat. She stepped forward, her eyes darting to the camera above the door. "You think you've won?" "I know I have." "You think he'll stay away?" She hissed. "You think you can erase my blood from your walls?" I let out a breath that fogged the night between us. "It's not your blood, it's his. And he's not my problem anymore." She lunged. A half step, hands clawed like she meant to scratch my face off. But she stopped herself. She always did. Because she liked to control, but she hated consequences more. "Stay off my property, Lillian," I said. "Next time, I won't just turn on the lights." She straightened, her lips curling into that same brittle smile she'd worn the first day she demanded my keys. "You can change the locks 100 times, Marcella. But you'll always hear me scratching at the door." "Not forever," I said. "One day you'll run out of claws." She turned and disappeared into the night, the roses catching at her coat like they wanted a piece of her. I watched her go, my heart steady, my breath even. Inside, I sat in the living room, the photo from the courthouse tucked under the glass top of the coffee table. My name, my house, my fortress. I knew she wasn't finished. I knew there would be more notes, more dead flowers, more threats hidden in plain sight. But I also knew this. I wasn't the same woman she'd tried to break. This house had walls she'd never touch again, because the only key that mattered now was the one I'd forged myself. A lock no one else could turn. The nights that followed Lillian's last visit blurred into each other like wet ink on a page. Every evening, I sat by the window with my mug of tea. No sugar, always black, watching the street for any sign of her car. The roses out front had grown so thick they were like a living barricade, their thorns catching the moonlight. A fortress I'd planted with my own hands. Some nights I almost convinced myself it was over. That the cameras would stay quiet. That the locks would hold. That the cold weight of fear I had learned to live with would melt into the walls, leaving me warm, untouched. But Lillian had never known how to lose gracefully. It began with small things. The post box jammed with junk mail, the return address missing but the handwriting unmistakable, hers. Notes scribbled on the backs of takeaway menus. You'll never really be free. She wanted me to open the door, to step back into the game. But I didn't. I left each note in a folder, dated, time-stamped, tucked away with the photos from the break-ins and the court documents that still smelled like cheap paper and stale air. Proof that if she ever crossed the line again, I'd bury her with her own words. Julian didn't write anymore. Not since his arrest. I didn't know where he was. Maybe a halfway house. Maybe living in one of her guest rooms, the same ones she'd once offered to me like a poisoned gift. Sometimes I wondered what he'd tell himself when he looked at my empty side of the bed. If he blamed me for his ruin, or if he finally saw the bars she'd built around him long before I ever put my name on that mortgage. I didn't wish him well. But I didn't wish him ill either. Some ghosts you just let drift. One evening in late September, I came home from the shop to find the lock jammed. Not picked, not broken, just ruined, the cylinder filled with something that looked like glue. I had to call a locksmith to drill it out. He worked in silence while I made tea, his drill whining like an angry wasp. When he was done, he handed me the new keys, silver, heavy in my palm. Happens more than you'd think, he said. Neighbors, exes, people can't stand not having the last word. She'll never get the last word, I said, and I meant it. The new lock was better than the last. Reinforced steel, deadbolt twice as deep. I added it to my growing collection of spare keys in the tin on the mantel. A graveyard of locks she'd forced me to bury. Autumn crept in, painting the trees gold and rust. The days grew shorter, the nights colder. Business at the florist's boomed as weddings and harvest festivals filled my order book. I liked the work. My hands sunk deep in petals and stems, something living to shape and nurture. It reminded me there was still beauty in the world, still things worth tending that couldn't be ripped up with the roots. Then, on a Tuesday that smelled like rain and rotting leaves, the letter came. Not from Lillian this time, not from Julian, but from a name I hadn't heard in over a decade. My cousin Riley, Marcella, asterisk it began in his neat, careful script. I know this is out of the blue, but I heard what's happened. I'm sorry. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. I hadn't spoken to Riley since my father's funeral. We'd been close once, as children, running barefoot through my dad's orchard, pockets full of stolen apples, secrets whispered under the old oak tree. But time and distance, life and grief, they'd carved us into strangers. I sat with that letter for a long time. It felt like an invitation to remember who I'd been before I became the woman who counted locks instead of blessings. That weekend, I called him. His voice on the other end was like a door swinging open. He asked about the house, about the shop, about me. I told him everything. Slowly at first, then in a rush that left me breathless. You sound strong, he said. I don't feel strong, I admitted. That's because strength doesn't feel like you think it does, he said. It's not about standing tall, it's about standing up. even when you'd rather lie down. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, connected. To someone who knew me before the keys and the locks and the battles I never asked to fight. It gave me an idea. I took the tin of old keys from the mantel and drove out to the orchard where my father's ashes were buried. The orchard was half wild now, the fences leaning, the trees heavy with fruit left to fall and rot. I stood under the old oak where Riley and I once carved our initials, the bark grown thick over our childish scars. One by one, I dropped each key into the dirt at the base of the tree. The first key from our wedding, the one Julian and I held between us like a promise. The spare I'd given him when he left, the one Lillian had copied behind my back, the one Julian taped to my door after the pharmacy break-in. All of them. Little pieces of my past, rusting in the earth. I whispered to the tree. Maybe to my father, maybe to myself. You can keep them. I don't need them anymore. Driving home, I felt lighter. The house waited for me, quiet and warm. The new lock clicked shut behind me, solid, certain. That night, for the first time in a long while, I dreamed of the future instead of the past. A future where Lillian was just a story I told myself sometimes, a reminder of the price of letting someone else hold your keys. But dreams, like locks, can be broken. It was a Friday when I saw her again. I was watering the roses, the hose snaking through the thick branches. She stood at the end of the path, leaning on her cane like a monarch surveying her lost kingdom. "It's over, Lillian," I called. My voice didn't tremble. "Go home." She didn't move. "You think you're safe?" "I know I am." She laughed, a small broken sound. "He'll come back. You know that, don't you? He'll come crawling back. And you'll open the door." "No," I said. "I won't." Her eyes narrowed, the years of poison etched deep into the lines around her mouth. "You think you're different. But you're not. You're just like me." I let the hose drop, water pooling around my boots. "No, Lillian, that's the point. I'm nothing like you." She turned, hobbling down the path, her coat catching on the rose thorns. They didn't let her pass without drawing blood. I watched her go, the cold October wind carrying the last of her threats away. Then I went inside, locked the door, and pressed my palm to the new deadbolt. It was warm from the afternoon sun. I knew this wasn't the end. She'd find new ways to test the walls I'd built. But every time she did, she'd find me stronger. The girl who once thought love meant handing over the keys was gone. In her place stood me. Marcella Rowan. Homeowner. Gatekeeper. Survivor. And the locks? The locks were just the beginning. Sometimes I think the house breathes with me. That its old bones settle a little easier, now that it's just my heartbeat echoing through the halls. In the first few weeks after Lillian's last visit, I half expected to see her shadow slithering through the garden again, hear her cane tapping against the flagstones like a summons. But the roses grew thicker, the locks stayed shut, and each night I slept a little deeper. I kept the cameras up, though. Fear doesn't vanish. It mutates, shifts into new shapes that live under your ribs. When the wind rattled the window panes, I'd glance at the monitor on my phone just to see the blank dark of my porch, empty, but for the swing I'd promised myself I'd repaint come spring. I liked knowing I could see who was out there, even if no one was. I liked that the walls, the doors, the locks, they listened only to me now. The florist shop carried me through the dull ache of winter. Bouquets for cold funerals, for hopeful first dates, for birthdays marked by gritted smiles and cake. My hands smelled of roses and lilies, the scent sharp enough to drown out the stale memory of hospital antiseptic that used to cling to me in the early days. When Julian still tried to fix what was broken between us with flowers, he never arranged himself. Riley called often now, once a week, then twice, then whenever I needed. He'd tell me stories about his partner, the old house he was renovating, the orchard back home. I'd close my eyes and let his voice remind me of simpler seasons, where no one demanded my keys in exchange for love. One late evening, the shop phone rang just as I was counting out the till. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some instinct, old and sour, told me to pick up. Mrs. Rowan? The voice on the other end was unfamiliar. Clipped. A young man. I'm calling from St. Bridget's. It's about Julian. My fingers went cold around the pen in my hand. What about him? He's been brought in. He listed you as next of kin. I laughed, the sound ugly in my throat. I'm not. I know, the voice said gently. He didn't have anyone else. I sat down hard on the stool by the register. Is he dead? No. He's stable now. Overdose. We need your consent for treatment decisions. I felt my body split into two people, one that wanted to slam the phone down and never pick it up again, and another that whispered, "You loved him once. That doesn't just die." Not. I stayed sitting there long after I'd given them what they needed. My consent, my half-hearted promise to come by. When I finally locked up, the night felt brittle around me. The walk home was a blur of streetlights and rain mist on my skin. Inside the house, I kicked off my boots, shed my coat. The tin on the mantel, once brimming with old keys, sat empty now. I ran my fingers along its rim, an echo of everything I'd given up to keep this place mine. At St. Bridget's, the smell of bleach hit me like a slap. Julian lay on the narrow bed, his face slack, eyes closed. For a moment, I could almost believe we were back at the beginning. Two kids with empty pockets and wild hope, dreaming of keys to a house that didn't exist yet. He stirred when he heard me. "Marseille," he rasped. "I knew you'd come." I stood at the foot of the bed, hands tucked in my pockets. "I'm not here for you. I'm here for me." He winced, tried to sit up. "She's gone crazy, you know. Mum, she says you stole everything from us." "Did I?" I asked. "Or did you both give it away?" He dropped his gaze, staring at the IV drip like it might save him from the truth. "She's my mother. And I was your wife." I leaned in closer. "But you handed her the keys to us. You never changed the locks." He looked so small in that bed. Not the man I'd married. Not even the man I'd fought beside. Just a husk she'd hollowed out with her need to own everything he touched. "What do you want, Julian?" I asked. "Do you want her gone?" His eyes fluttered closed. I don't know how. I felt my heart crack. Not out of love, but pity. The kind of pity you bury under the floorboards because if you let it grow, it'll tear you apart from the inside. "Then I can't help you," I said. "No one can until you change your locks." When I left his room, Lillian was waiting in the corridor. She looked older than I'd ever seen her. Her hair pulled tight, her coat hanging off her shoulders like skin that didn't fit right anymore. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You turned him against me." I laughed. "No, Lillian. You did that all by yourself." She stepped closer. I could see the tremble in her hands, the cracks in her foundation. "He'll come home with me. He'll get better with me." "You'll bury him," I said. "And you know it." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence between us was a confession neither of us needed to speak aloud. Back home, the house felt like an exhale. The walls closed around me, not like a prison, but like arms. I curled up on the couch with my phone pressed to my ear, Riley's voice filling the quiet spaces. "You did the right thing," he said. "It doesn't feel like it, because right doesn't feel good. It feels necessary." I looked at the front door, at the lock gleaming in the soft lamplight. "I don't know if this will ever really be over." "It won't," Riley said. "But you'll keep building walls. And one day they'll be too high for her to climb." A week later, I got the call. Julian was being discharged. Lillian was taking him back to her house. Her last fortress, mortgaged to the bone, wrapped in the scent of old regrets and cheap perfume. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't visit. I didn't bring flowers. Instead, I planted a new row of lavender by the front walk. I repainted the porch swing. I made the house mine again, one small act at a time. One evening I stood at the front window, a mug of tea in my hands, watching the dusk settle on my street. I thought about the keys buried under my father's old oak tree, rusting away into the dirt. I thought about the locks changed and rechanged, the cameras that blinked like watchful eyes, and I thought about the door behind me, closed, locked, safe. She hadn't won. She never would. And if she came knocking again, she'd find the same woman she'd underestimated. Only stronger, sharper, rooted deeper than the roses that tangled in her coat. Because the house breathes with me now, and every door that shuts behind me is a promise. No one takes my keys again. After Julian went back to her house, my world went quiet again. Not peaceful, quiet. The kind of quiet that hums at the edges of your mind, reminding you that the storm is only ever waiting. I learned to live with that hum, the way you learn to live with a scar. It doesn't heal. You just stop picking at it. The days slid into each other like rain on glass. Mornings at the florist's, my fingers smelling of soil and blossoms. Afternoons cleaning the shop window, watching my reflection blur behind the glass. Evenings spent on my porch swing, freshly painted, the lavender scent drifting on the breeze. I liked to imagine my father sitting beside me sometimes. He'd tap the wood, nod at the house, say, "Good walls, Marcella, good locks." He'd be proud of what I'd built, what I'd fought to keep. But pride doesn't keep nightmares away. It was almost winter when I saw her again. Or rather, she made sure I saw her. I was hauling bags of mulch to the back garden, planting bulbs for the spring, because hope grows better when you bury it deep. I heard the crunch of gravel, the squeal of old brakes. Her car, blue, dented on the side where Julian once clipped the gate when we were kids and stupid and in love. She stepped out like she owned the road, cane tapping the stones, scarf knotted tight around her neck. Her eyes met mine across the garden. For a moment, I saw the woman she used to pretend to be. Gracious, smiling, the mother-in-law who brought casseroles and cut flowers in cracked glass vases. But the smile was gone now, the graciousness eaten away by her hunger for control. "Marcella," she called, voice thin but sharp as a blade. "Don't pretend you can't see me." I set the bag of mulch down, wiped my hands on my jeans. "I see you, Lillian. What do you want?" She tilted her head, bird-like. "You've been ignoring my calls." "I changed my number." Her mouth twitched. "I know. I have my ways." I crossed my arms, the cold biting at my knuckles. "Say what you came to say." She stepped closer, the cane digging little half-moons into the soft earth of my garden path. "Julian wants to come home." My laugh startled a bird from the fence post. "This isn't his home anymore. He's your husband," she snapped. "You took vows, which you tore apart, piece by piece. Every time you let yourself in without knocking," I said, my voice low and steady. "Every time you told him I wasn't enough. Every time you reminded him who really owned him." Her eyes narrowed. "He's sick, Marcella. You owe him." "I owe him nothing," I said. "I gave him a key. He gave it to you. That's done." She lunged forward, grabbed my wrist with a grip stronger than I'd expected from bones so brittle. "He'll always belong here. With you. Don't you see that?" I didn't flinch, didn't pull away. "No, Lillian, he belongs with you. He always did." She dropped my wrist like it burned her. For a heartbeat, I thought she'd hit me. But her hand curled around the cane instead, white-knuckled. "This house," she hissed, "it'll rot around you. You'll see. No walls are strong enough to keep you warm when you're alone." I let her words hang there, like fog in the garden. Then I stepped back, picked up the bag of mulch. "You're wrong," I said, "because alone is better than owned." She spat at the roses as she turned to leave. The spit caught on a thorn and clung there, a glistening pearl of her hate. I watched her car rattle down the lane, the dent catching the afternoon sun. Inside, I poured myself tea, strong, black, no sugar. My reflection in the kitchen window was clear, solid. Mine. I thought about the keys rusting under my father's oak tree. About the locks changed so many times, they felt like fresh skin over old wounds. Julian never came. Whether she barred him from calling me or whether he simply gave up trying, I didn't care. His ghost drifted out of the corners of the house until all that was left was the echo of who we'd been, and even that faded when I painted the master bedroom a soft sage green. New color. New start. I spent the winter that way, layering warmth onto every inch of my fortress. New curtains, soft and heavy enough to shut the night out. New rugs under my bare feet when I padded into the kitchen at dawn. A new lock on the shed out back, where I kept my father's old tools and the memories they carried. Spring came again. The lavender bushes survived the frost, stubborn blooms pressing up through the thawing soil. I spent whole afternoons out there, pruning, planting, whispering secrets into the dirt, like a promise that nothing would take root here without my say-so. One evening I found Riley waiting on my porch steps. He'd driven up from the orchard, a box of fresh apples on his lap. "Thought you might like these," he said. "Taste like we were kids again." We sat on the swing until the sun dipped behind the neighbor's roof. I told him everything. Lillian's visit, Julian's ghost, the spit on my roses. He listened, nodding like every word planted him deeper beside me. "You've done it," he said when I finished. "You've built the wall she can't climb." I stared at the house behind us, its windows catching the last of the light. "Doesn't feel like it." "That's because you keep waiting for her to knock," he said. "One day you'll wake up and realize you don't hear her scratching at the door anymore." That night, I slept with the window cracked open. The scent of lavender drifted through the room, soft as a lullaby. No nightmares, no footsteps in the hall. Just the house breathing with me, each exhale another brick in the fortress I'd built around my heart. In the morning, I found a single envelope stuck in the front gate. No name, no return address. Inside, one photo. Julian, sitting on Lillian's porch, shoulders slumped, a bottle dangling from his hand. On the back, scrawled in her sharp, acid handwriting, "This is what you did." I stood there in the garden, the dew soaking through my slippers. I felt the old fear, the guilt, the shame she loved to weave into every word she ever spoke. But it didn't stick this time. It slid off like rain on waxed glass. I tore the photo in half, then in half again. Then again until it was confetti in my palm. And I whispered to the roses, "Not my key to turn anymore." I buried the shreds under the new mulch, pressed the soil down firm. Inside, the kettle whistled like a song. The locks clicked behind me. New, strong, unmoving. And in that moment, I knew. The house didn't just belong to me. I belonged to it. Safe. Sealed. Mine. The days after I buried the photo passed like slow-moving clouds. I could feel her anger out there, drifting beyond my fence line. Lillian's rage had nowhere to stick now, so it clung to the edges of my thoughts but never made it through the locks. The roses grew taller. The lavender pushed through the mulch I'd pressed down over Julian's photo shreds, their soft purple heads nodding in the breeze like they knew they'd outlast her. I found a kind of rhythm in the quiet. Early mornings I'd walk the garden, coffee steaming in my hand, the frost biting at my slippers until the sun rose enough to warm the ground. Then I'd head to the shop, the bell over the door chiming me back into a world where people paid me for beauty. Weddings, anniversaries, even funerals. They wanted flowers that said hope and asterisk love, and asterisk goodbye, asterisk. But none of them really understood that sometimes all three were the same thing. At night I'd sink into the swing, listening to the creak of its chains, the soft knock of my boots against the porch rail. It felt like a heartbeat I could trust, one that belonged only to me. But old ghosts are stubborn. It was early summer when the next letter came. A crisp, cream envelope slipped under my door sometime in the night. No stamp. No return address. Just my name in that tight, sharp script I'd know anywhere. Inside, 2 lines. "He's sick again. You'll come." or you'll regret it. No signature. None needed. The air in the house felt colder after I read it, the shadows at the corners of the room stretching longer than they should. I poured a mug of tea, let the kettle's hiss drown out the echo of her threat. You'll come, or you'll regret it. It rang in my head like a bell, but regret was a blade she'd dulled long ago. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, staring at the envelope. By the time the sun cracked over the garden, the decision was made. I folded the letter once, twice, 3 times and fed it into the flame of a match. The paper curled, blackened, fell into the sink in drifting ashes. I washed them down the drain. When the phone rang that afternoon, I didn't answer. When it rang again at midnight, I let it buzz until the voicemail cut in. Lillian's voice filled the line, scratchy with old fury. "Marcella, he's dying. Are you proud? You made him sick, you did this, you left him with me." I didn't listen to the rest. I pressed crest, delete, asterisk the phone's screen going dark in my palm. My breath fogged against the glass of the kitchen window as I stood there, staring out at the garden. He'd been mine once, but that door had closed with a slam so final, even she couldn't pry it open again. 2 days later, I found another envelope, this one nailed to the garden gate. The nail was driven right through the wood, splitting the grain. A single photograph inside. Julian in a hospital bed, tubes taped to his arms, his eyes half open, that look of old, wasted hope on his face. On the back, her words, "Keys can't keep you safe from your own heart." I stood there, the early sun catching on the nail's head, bright as a drop of blood. For a moment, I felt something flicker in my chest. A flicker of pity, of guilt, of the girl who once brought him coffee in bed and kissed his hair when the weight of his mother pressed him into the floorboards. But that girl didn't live here anymore. I folded the photo, dropped it into the compost bin behind the roses. Let the earth do what it does best, break down what no longer feeds you. That evening, I called Riley. I told him everything. The letters, the photos, the voicemails I'd deleted. He was quiet on the other end, the sound of his orchard alive behind him. Birds, wind through branches, the soft creak of a gate I hadn't seen in years. "You want me to come up there?" he asked finally. I smiled, the tears caught behind my teeth. "No, I'm okay." "You sure?" "I'm sure." "Good," he said. "Because I'll come. I'll stand on that porch with you if you need. But I think you've got this one on your own." I hung up, the garden outside catching the first glimmer of dusk. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my pruning shears, and headed for the roses. Each snip felt like a promise to myself. No matter how many keys she made, how many letters she sent, I wouldn't let her in. A week later, Julian died. I found out the way I'd learned everything about him lately, secondhand. A neighbor knocked on my door, sympathy dripping from his voice like oil. "So sorry, Marcella, for your loss." I thanked him, shut the door, stood there with my hand on the knob, feeling the weight of those words. Your loss. But I didn't feel loss. I felt something sharper, stranger. Relief tangled up with sorrow, pity buried in cold earth. That night, I dreamed of the house again, its walls thick as castle stones, its windows glowing warm and golden. In the dream, Julian stood on the porch, shivering in the rain, one hand pressed to the glass. But when he tried the door, the lock held. And when he knocked, the house hummed back. "No more keys. Not for you." I woke up before dawn, sat on the porch swing, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The roses stirred in the breeze, brushing against the railing, like ghosts come to visit, but never to stay. His funeral was a small thing. Closed casket, Lillian dressed in mourning black so sharp it looked like armor. She didn't look at me when I stood at the back of the church. Didn't speak when I laid a single white rose on the casket lid. No one asked me to stand by her side. And I didn't want to. Afterward, she found me in the churchyard. Her eyes were wet but hard, her cane tapping out a jagged rhythm on the gravel. "You think you've won?" she asked, her voice low. "You think you've locked me out?" I didn't answer. I just turned away, my feet crunching over the stones. She called after me. "You can't keep the dead from knocking, Marcella. They'll find a way back in. They always do." Back home, I opened every window. Let the late spring air chase the funeral from the corners. The house sighed around me, its walls settling like old bones. I walked from room to room, touching the paint, the floors, the locks. I changed and changed again. No one could get in now. Not her. Not him. Not the ghosts of who I'd been when I first handed over my keys like they were proof of love. That night, I sat on the porch swing until the moon rose over the garden. The lavender was in full bloom, their scent drifting through the open windows like an offering. I whispered to the house, to myself, to the girl I'd buried under the oak tree along with every old key. "It's yours now. Only yours." And in the hush that followed, I swear the house breathed back. Mine. Ours. Always. The summer after Julian's funeral arrived like a slow exhale. Warm days melted into cool evenings where the scent of my lavender drifted through every open window. People in town gave me those soft, pitying smiles when I walked into the grocer's or the post office. I let them think what they wanted. Let them believe the story they'd written for me. The sad widow in the big old house she kept locked like a treasure chest. But I knew the truth. I wasn't mourning him. I was mourning the girl who once thought giving him a key was the same as giving him love. The days were long and honeyed, the garden thick with bees. The florists kept me busy. Brides came in with glossy magazines, pointing at peonies I had to ship in overnight. Elderly couples wanted roses for anniversaries that outlasted every storm life hurled their way. I wrapped the stems in twine and brown paper, my hands forever scented with green and bloom. Riley came to visit more often. He'd drive up from the orchard with a basket of windfall apples, or a bag of tools when the porch steps needed fixing. Sometimes he'd sit on the swing beside me in the evening and talk about his partner, the rows of new saplings they'd planted, the way the orchard smelled in the morning. And I'd tell him about my house, every corner scrubbed clean of ghosts, every window flung open to the sun. "I still hear her sometimes," I admitted one night as the crickets sang. "In my head, scratching at the door." He tapped the swing's chain with his boot. "You know what that is, don't you?" "What?" "Your walls talking back to you, telling you they're stronger than she ever was." I wanted to believe him. Most days I did. But fear is clever. It knows how to slip under the floorboards and wait for you in the dark. It was August when I found the package on my doorstep. No name, no postage. Wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with twine. For a moment I just stared at it, the back of my neck prickling. Then I picked it up, carried it inside like it might bite. I sat at the kitchen table, the house silent but for the hum of the fridge. My fingers worked at the knot, slow and careful. When the paper fell away, I saw the edges of a photo album, old leather, cracked at the spine. My heart stopped. I knew it before I opened it. Julian's baby pictures, our wedding photos, stubs of movie tickets, pressed flowers from our honeymoon, scraps of a life I'd packed away in a box and left in the attic after he moved out. I'd thought they were gone, but Lillian must have found them. She'd kept them like trophies. At the very back, a single Polaroid slipped between the pages. Julian sitting in her living room, pale and thin, staring at the camera like he'd forgotten what it meant to smile. A note scrawled on the back in her careful hand. "He came home. You never did." I closed the album, the weight of it pressing into my palms. She was still trying to slip in through the cracks, remind me that she'd always be standing just outside the door waiting for me to hand her away back in. But that night, instead of burying it under the lavender or burning it in the sink, I sat on the porch swing with the album in my lap. I flipped through every page, every photo. I let myself remember the parts that had been real. The way he laughed when he burned dinner. The way he held my face in his hands the first time he told me he loved me. The parts that were good before she sank her claws into them. When the last page was done, I closed the cover and whispered to the moon overhead, "You don't get this, Lillian. Not anymore." I dug a hole by the old rosebush, deep enough to hold the past. I laid the album in, pressed the dirt down until it was packed tight. Then I planted a new rose on top, a climbing variety, white and wild, its thorns so thick they'd slice skin from bone if you weren't careful. Afterward, I sat in the swing, dirt still under my fingernails. I could almost feel the house settle around me, its walls humming a promise. No more keys. No more doors for her to slip through. Summer waned. The air turned crisp, the garden shedding leaves like secrets. I started hosting small gatherings on the porch. Riley, a few friends from the florists, neighbors who'd once whispered about me behind my back and now brought wine and stories instead. Laughter bounced off the old bricks, echoing down the street. I could feel the house breathing with me, alive in a way it hadn't been in years. And yet, one evening, after everyone had gone, I found the gate ajar. The latch was bent. The nail that once held her last letter rusted into the wood. A single rose, white, half-bloomed, lay on the path, its stem snapped, petals bruised. I knew her fingerprints were all over it. I picked it up, twirling it between my fingers. A message without a word. I'm still here, watching. I pressed the rose flat between the pages of an old book, locked it away like a relic. She could leave her ghosts. I'd keep them sealed. The first frost came early that year. I wrapped the roses, covered the lavender beds. I nailed the gate shut where the latch was broken. No more swinging open on the wind, no more invitations for her to slip inside. Riley called from the orchard on Christmas Eve. You should come down, spend the holiday with us. You know you'd be welcome. I looked at my house, candles flickering in the windows, a pot of soup simmering on the stove. The garden beyond the glass, sleeping under its blanket of snow. Thank you, I said, but I'm exactly where I need to be. That night, I dreamed of her standing on the porch, keys jangling in her bony fist. But when she reached for the lock, the door didn't budge. The keys turned to dust in her hands. And I woke with a smile on my lips, the morning light already pressing against the frost on the window. New Year's came. I stood in the garden, a cup of tea steaming between my palms. I buried another box under the rose bushes. Old receipts, old court letters, copies of the mortgage papers she'd once refused to read. The last anchors she'd used to weigh me down. As I pressed the soil flat, I whispered, "Stay buried." And for the first time in years, I believed it might. Inside, the house hummed around me. The locks clicked shut behind me like a heartbeat. Safe. Mine. One more chapter yet. Winter melted into the kind of spring that seemed to breathe new life into everything but the shadows. The roses by the garden gate bloomed like they were guarding a secret. The lavender spread in waves under my windows. Sometimes, if I closed my eyes, I could almost imagine I'd lived here my whole life alone. That there'd never been keys pressed into hands that didn't deserve them. That there'd never been doors kicked open by people who mistook love for ownership. But memory is stubborn. And so was Lillian. It had been months since I'd seen her, since that last battered rose on my garden path. Some part of me wondered if she'd finally burned herself out, like a storm that roars too long until it can only whisper. The whispers, though, those are the ones that linger. I heard them in the creak of the porch boards, the rustle of the lavender at midnight. I heard them in my own bones when I lay awake, the house breathing soft around me. Then came the letter. No envelope this time. Just a folded sheet of paper slipped under the gate like a snake. Riley was visiting when I found it. He stood at my shoulder while I read the single line scrawled in that sharp, slanted hand I'd know anywhere. I'm dying. You owe me this. No, please. No apology. Just the command of a woman who never asked for anything she could take by force. Riley exhaled a curse under his breath. Don't you dare. I didn't answer him right away. I went inside, made us tea, sat at the kitchen table where I'd once laid out the mortgage papers for Julian like a lifeline he refused to hold on to. The light from the window painted his ghost on the floor. I ignored it. What if she really is? I asked, voice small. What if she really is dying? Riley leaned forward, his hand warm over mine. Then let her die, knowing you don't owe her a damn thing. I wanted to believe it was that simple. But guilt is an old vine. It curls back around your heart when you think you've cut it down to the roots. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me like an old dog at my feet. At dawn, I made up my mind. I drove to her house. The same one Julian and I used to visit on tense Sunday afternoons when she'd drop hints about grandchildren and investments and family money. I hadn't been here since the day I told her she'd never get my keys again. The garden was wild now, grass knee-high, roses dead and clawing at the fence. I knocked once before letting myself in. The smell hit me first, antiseptic and something sour beneath it. She was in the front room, propped up on a hospital bed that looked too big for her shrinking frame. Her hair was a halo of brittle white against the pillows. When she saw me, her mouth curled in a parody of a smile. "You came!" I didn't move closer. I stood in the doorway, the light behind me like a shield. "What do you want, Lillian?" She coughed, a dry, rattling sound that scraped my ears raw. "You think you've won. All your locks, all your papers. But you're still here, aren't you? Still mine." I almost laughed. "I'm not yours. I never was." Her eyes flashed, the same fury that once kept me awake for nights on end. "He died because you left. You shut the door on him. You shut the door on me." "You broke him long before I did," I said. "And you know it." She hissed, her breath wheezing through her teeth. "Sit with me. You owe me that." I didn't sit. I stayed in the doorway. I thought of the keys rusting under my father's oak tree, the rose bushes swallowing up every old promise I'd buried there. I thought of the house waiting for me, clean, locked, alive with the sound of my own breathing. "No," I said. "I don't owe you anything." Her eyes narrowed, glassy with tears that never fell. "When I'm gone, you'll still hear me, scratching at your door." I let the silence answer her. Then I turned and walked out of that house for the last time. The front door swung shut behind me with a click that felt like a lock sliding into place somewhere deep inside my chest. I didn't look back. Riley was waiting on my porch when I got home. He didn't ask what happened. He just handed me a mug of tea, strong and black, no sugar. We sat on the swing while the sun dipped behind the fence line, the garden breathing its wild lavender scent around us. "You did it," he said finally. "Did what?" "Closed the door. For good." I looked at my house. Its windows warm, its locks sure. I thought about the girl who once believed love meant handing over the keys to every room of her life. The girl who thought keeping the peace was worth leaving her doors wide open for the wolves. She was gone now. In her place was me, Marcella Rowan, homeowner, gatekeeper, survivor. A week later, word came that Lillian was gone. No funeral announcement. No neighbors in black coats offering awkward hugs. Just a phone call from a stranger telling me the last ghost at my door had slipped into the dark. I stood in my garden that night, the moon high above, my roses catching its silver light. The house behind me was quiet, its locks humming soft and steady like a heartbeat that would never again skip for her. I buried the last letter under the old oak tree beside my father's roots. I pressed the dirt down with my palms until my fingers ached. And then I whispered to the wind, "Stay gone." When I turned back, the porch light glowed warm through the dusk. The swing waited for me, creaking in the breeze like a lullaby. I sat there until dawn, listening to the walls breathe, listening to my own pulse settle into the only promise that ever really mattered, my keys, my doors, my rules. They'd never belong to anyone else again. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.